Here we go. And a one, and a two, and a three, and a four. I was buried beneath my shame. Who could carry that kind of weight? It was my dream till I met you. Oh, I was breathing but not alive. All my failures I tried to hide. It was my tomb till I met you. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. Now your mercy has saved my soul. Now your freedom is all that I know. The old made new. Jesus, when I met you, when you called my name, and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. You called my name and I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness into your glorious day. My sin was heavy, the chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are call
Good morning, Rooted Men. Matt Ryan from the Rooted Ministries. Pleasure to be with you this Thursday morning. Welcome to our Rooted Men study. Getting together every morning, well, at least Monday through Friday, every morning to dig into the Word, to start our day with the right perspective, moving our hearts into the right kingdom. We're working through 1 Corinthians at the moment. And yesterday, we spent some time talking about Paul giving up his rights, his rights to, be married, his right to a salary, and what those kind of things mean about his path and his sacrifices in order to not only give him credibility, but also to be free in preaching the gospel without any restrictions wherever he goes. And today we go further into that same idea, obviously continuing those next verses and talking quite a bit about what it means operating in that. You've made that decision, you're living that way, and kind of some more examples, some more context about what it means to live in that sacrifice. One of those things is that today's word includes some ideas about being everything to everyone, which has been used poorly, I would say, to justify living an earthly life or a worldly life, as we would call it, continuing to live in whatever sin it is that you find yourself in, and not being concerned about living true to the gospel. And I just want to be sure before we even start that there's nothing in here that means that. So, not that I assume you would think that way, but many people tend to with this reading. So, kind of digging into it here. Though I'm free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not to having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get the crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. So there's a lot in there, right? Oh, goodness. Good morning, Lou. Sorry. So understanding this in context, of course, right? It's always so important that we bring context into what we're studying. And as we have been, Paul speaking, to the Corinthian church, and he's talking about why he's submitting himself to this hard life, right? Why did he give up the things he has rights to? Now, Paul does set a high bar, does set quite the example, but we shouldn't be discouraged that we can't necessarily live up to be exactly what he was. And I think he said that in yesterday's reading, that although he wishes everybody could, because it makes the message more powerful, understanding that not all of us can just sacrifice all of those things, right? That's not necessarily the life we were called to live, right? So, but part of what Paul's called to do is to preach to Gentiles, right? Which required him to change elements of his approach, right? He couldn't just speak through the Jewish frame of mind where he had been trained and taught, right? He said, though I'm free, I belong to no one. I made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. Now, there's the only time in all that verse he doesn't say to win everyone. He knows that's not going to happen, right? Even Paul, in his direct contact with Christ, knows he's not going to win everyone, right? So he says to the Jews, I became like a Jew, right? He runs through all these things. The idea being not to compromise with the world to fit in, but to understand the audience, to be seeking for similarities, not differences, right? Figuring out and understanding how we're all the same instead of just recognizing differences, right? So today, you know, that would be called some different things, right? It'd be called tolerance, inclusion, all these kind of things that become political buzzwords. But how is it that we best connect to people, right? So Paul's setting this example that he's willing to forego traditions and comforts in order to reach any audience is really the kind of the takeaway, right? So you think about when he's in Athens, right? He establishes rapport with the Greeks, right? Before he tells them about Jesus, he stands among their, you know, all the idolatry, all the statues, all the devotion they show publicly to all of their gods, right? Does he sit there and talk about how idolatry is wrong? Does he talk about how Athens is they're all going to hell because they're so lost? No. He doesn't try to open the door by condemning them. He uses those symbols and talks about pagan pride just to wake them up and get their attention, right? When he's speaking to educated Jews in Jerusalem, he talks about his education to set the example, right? I'm earning your respect through the education I've gone through. I'm gaining that credibility with you, right? When he's in jail in Rome, how does he get out of being flogged, right? He tells them, oh, I'm a Roman citizen. Well, then the flogging doesn't happen, right? He's not doing all these things to brag. He's finding ways to connect, right? Because the audience needs to find you credible. That audience, right, doesn't necessarily mean a bunch of people. It could be one person. Oftentimes it can be ourselves, right? And so always working to find common ground first, to open the door so that he could tell them the uncomfortable things, the things that are true, right? So what does it mean to us, right? How do we become all things to all people, right? First of all, there's kind of some ideas that come through, right? Is first we listen, right? We're in such a rush, right, to share our thoughts, to share what we know to be true, especially when we know they need it so desperately, right? We don't need to jump right into a conversation. We don't need to push people off, right? We need to hear. Listening for connection points. Listening to where people are, meeting where they are, right? That demonstrates that we care. That gives you some credibility to maybe say hard things, right? So we're listening, we're forming connection. Then we need to be kind, right? Like Paul doesn't go into a speech like he could about idolatry. No, he chooses instead to connect to them softly and then share with them the hope that comes. It doesn't need to be negative, you know, but oftentimes we can forget to be kind when we're in the moment because we become defensive of our position, right? That's totally natural as humans, especially on the internet. For those of you who are thinking that I don't know what that, I don't connect with that idea of not being kind, you know, read the comment section sometimes to any statement that's made about God, right? So we discipline ourselves to listen. We discipline ourselves to be kind, to stay kind, regardless of what's said and what's going on. No, we're not giving up the message. We're not giving up our truth, right? But we're also not going to behave like this world tells us to behave, right? Kindness involves being sensitive to where people are, to their culture, to whatever it was in their life that brought them to the position they're in that you might not agree with, right? It doesn't mean that they necessarily had a list of behavior options and chose the one that violates God's law or that breaks God's heart, right? People aren't choosing to live in this kingdom. They may just not know. And so being kind, being sensitive, right? Deal with prejudice, with the fact that you make these conclusions about people, that because of your upbringing or your experience, right? So we kind of come to God and say, hey, I'm proud. I have judgmental attitudes. I have a lack of love. But I want to be more of all things to all people. And so those are things that I need to repent of. Recognize that, we have faults, which isn't that the first thing that everyone wants to point out. The church is full of hypocrites. You mess up too. And that really is something we lead with. Lead with our brokenness. Now we're in this position where we're, psychologists call it the one down position. We've submitted ourselves to them. Paul calls it, I'm a slave to everyone, right? And he also talks about disciplining his body and making it a slave. And that's the same thing we're doing with our minds. As we go through this process each morning of digging in and saying, each day we're going to recommit to the word. That's discipline, right? So our goal as a Christian, as someone who's living out this calling to spread the word, to share it, to make disciples, to create people who are going to be saved, find ways to connect to people to save, is to be inoffensive in every way we can, except when it comes to the truth of the cross. Because the message of the cross, right, is naturally offensive to a lot of people. It's offensive to this world, which is why Jesus told us, don't be surprised when the world hates you. It hated me first, right? Because the message that Christ brings of hope offends pride. It offends all of the sins, right? Everything that our body tells us to do, everything that this kingdom tells us to do, right, is contradicted by the message of the cross. So our behavior and attitudes have to reflect that. We have to be willing to lower ourselves to say, hey, I understand. This is countercultural. It's not what the world teaches. It's not what even your feelings inside teach you. So when we work our best to follow Paul's example, and no one's going to live up to it perfectly, and there's no expectation that you do, right? But if we're going to become all things to all people, then we've got to be willing to humble ourselves, which means letting go of our rights, right? What Paul calls it, his rights. Meet people where they are and do what Jesus calls you to do. It's got to be simplified. And even though it's simple, it's not easy, right? Because we've got to go through those training things for ourselves. We've got to remember to keep ourselves in check, because the goal is to win another and another and another. The goal is not to be right. The goal is not to justify our position. So meet people where they are. Love them enough to reach them and speak to them in a way that they can understand, right? All right, I've gone on too long. I love you all. I hope that's a good word for you this morning, and I hope it's encouraging, because there is encouragement in it, even though it can be difficult to hear sometimes, right? So that's our challenge for today, right? Let's have a firmly rooted day, and let someone see Jesus in us truly today. Peace.